Good morning. It's good to be with you as we continue together in our book of John. Today we're going to be reading John chapter 11. We're going to finish out chapter 11 today. We're going to read 11, verse 45 through 57 to the end of this chapter. So John 11, 45 through 57. Many of the Jews, therefore, had come with Mary and had seen what Jesus did, believing in him. But some of them went to the Pharisees and told them what he had done. So the chief priests and the Pharisees called a meeting of the council and said, "What are we to do? If this man is performing many signs. If we let him go on like this, everyone will believe in him. But the Romans will come and destroy both our holy place and our nation." But one of them, Caiaphas, who was chief priest that year, high priest that year, said to them, "You know nothing at all. You do not understand that it is better for you to have one man die for the people than to have the whole nation destroyed." He did not say this on his own, but being high priest that year, he prophesied that Jesus was about to die for the nation, and not only for the nation, but also gather into one the dispersed children of God. So from that day on, they planned to put him to death. Jesus therefore no longer walked around openly among the Jews, but went from there to a town called Ephraim in the region near the wilderness, and he remained there with the disciples. Now the Passover of the Jews was near, and many went up from the country to Jerusalem before the Passover to purify themselves. They were looking for Jesus and were asking one another as they stood in the temple, "What do you think? Surely will he not come to the festival, will he?" Now the chief priests and the Pharisees had given orders that anyone who knew where Jesus was should let them know that they may arrest him. Today's text has one of those interesting God things. So Caiaphas, the chief priest, was saying, um, we need, it's better for one man to die. He said, it's better one man die for the people than to have the whole nation destroyed. So what the religious leaders feared and what they continue to fear throughout their time here was that if there was a revolution, remember, they were thinking Jesus was going to be an earthly king. They were not even contemplating a heavenly or spiritual Messiah. They were thinking earthly king. That's where their brains were. Jesus was going to be an earthly Messiah. He was going to be an earthly king. Their brains weren't even fathoming, their brains weren't even considering, let's use that word instead, what it might mean to be a heavenly Messiah. That's what Jesus was. That's what he was going to be. So Caiaphas was saying, well, if he's a revolutionary, if he's trying to launch an earthly kingdom, then it's better for him to die and to keep Rome out of here than it is for him to go about and have Rome, because of all this being stirred up, come with the legions and wipe us all out. It's better for Jesus to die and keep Rome out than it is for Rome to come. So thus better to have one man die and save the country. That's what Caiaphas is talking about. But what's happening in actuality here is it says he prophesied, and that's exactly what was going to happen. Jesus was going to die. It says here, not just for the country, but going to die for the temple, for the country, but was going to die for all the dispersed children of God. So that Jesus' death wasn't just for the nation of Israel. It wasn't just for the Jewish individuals. It wasn't just for his disciples, but it was for me and for you over 2,000 years later. Jesus' death was for all who were going to come to believe. Jesus' death was for the world. Jesus' death was for the world. And so Caiaphas was saying one thing and thinking one way, but God had another plan and that God had another intention for that. And this goes back to me. This makes me feel so much like Joseph in Genesis. In Genesis 50, verse 20, where Joseph says, what man intended for evil, God intended for good. Joseph was talking about his brothers threw him in a well, sold him as a slave, got rid of him. Joseph's brothers did all these things, and these things they were not trying to do good for Joseph. They were not trying to bless him or help him. They were trying to harm him. Joseph's brothers were intending to harm him because they were jealous of him. So Joseph says, so as Joseph was thrown in the well, sold to the Egyptians to slavers, eventually wound up in Egypt, becoming the number two person in all of Egypt, second only to Pharaoh. So when the Israelites were in need of salvation, when they were in need of safety and protection from the famine, Joseph was in the right place at the right time to save the people. And so Joseph says, the end of Genesis 50, in Genesis 50, verse 20, it says, what man intended for evil, God intended for good. In other words, your plans were to do harm. Your plans were to harm me. Your plans were to bring harm to me. Your plans were for my ill. You were intending to harm me. But what you intended for evil, God intended for good. All things work for good for those who love God according to his purpose. Caiaphas' plan here was for harm. His thought was, let's kill Jesus and keep the temple. Let's kill Jesus and keep our land. Let's kill Jesus and keep him out, Rome out of here. Let's get rid of this one guy. We get this one guy, it'll solve all of our problems. Let's get rid of him. Caiaphas intended this for evil. But man intended for evil, God intended for good. God was making a way even in the midst of this great evil. God's plan was good. God was going to bring something good out of something bad because that's what God does. So, trust in God. Maybe you're in a place right now where it seems as though people are trying to harm you. Maybe you feel betrayed. Maybe you feel belittled. Maybe you feel as though there's no path forward or no way forward. Maybe you feel like everything you're attempting is turning up bad. Maybe your life is because of the actions of others not taking the path that you thought it was going to take. You feel alone, bewildered, frustrated, put aside with. You may know I link it in here that I'm part of a podcast in our church. Me and Ryan and Mary Beth, my associate pastor and my youth pastor, we do a podcast dealing with church history, and we actually today's episode, the episode's out right now. We recorded yesterday, deals with suffering and how suffering. Well, it's actually talking about the stigmata, but that suffering, none of us want to suffer. None of us like to suffer. Our suffering is painful. It's not good. It hurts. But our suffering can be sanctifying. God can use our suffering. God can use our pain. God can use all of these things because God is good. And when we suffer and we cling to Jesus, we find that when Jesus is what we cling to, we find that Jesus is all that we need. Their intent was to harm Jesus. Their intent was not good. But God was going to use that for something good. What man intended for evil, God intended for good. So today, no matter what you're going through, no matter how bad it may feel, no matter how awful it may feel, no matter how much it may hurt, in the places where humans are intending things for evil, God will, if we allow, bring something good out of it. So today, trust in him. God's got a lot up his sleeve. God's doing more than we can think. God's doing more than we can imagine. Trust in him. God is good. God is good. And he will bring good out of our brokenness. What's the modern song that you sing a lot in church now? He turns graves into gardens. That's what God does. That's what he does. He does great things. So today, no matter what it may feel like, no matter how bad the intention may feel, trust that God will, through his grace, bring something good out of even these dark moments. What man intended for evil, God intended for good. So thank you for being with us as we continue in our time in John. Like I said, I'm back from camp meeting now. Everything should be rock and rolling normal. moving forward. So tomorrow, though, we'll pick up tomorrow with John chapter 12, and we got a little bit more in John, but we've made the turn. We're going to be finishing up John before a whole lot longer. So we'll go back to the Old Testament. So if there's something interesting you'd like to do in the Old Testament, let me know next, and we'd like to we'll start there in the Old Testament in the coming days. So thanks for being with us. Have a good rest of your day. See you tomorrow.